There is a moment captured on surveillance tape that investigators have watched hundreds of times. A tall young man, brown hair, jeans, a striped shirt, stands just outside the entrance to a second-floor bar. He says goodbye to two women. He turns. He walks back inside. And then he is never seen again. Not on any camera. Not on any street. Not in any hospital, any morgue, any border crossing, any airport. Not anywhere. The bar had no other publicly accessible exit. Every other camera in the building recorded the departing crowd when it closed minutes later. Brian Shaffer was not among them. He was not outside, waiting in the street. He was not anywhere that could be explained. He simply ceased to appear. 20 years have now passed. The bar itself no longer exists. The people who loved Brian Shaffer have lived entire chapters of their lives in the shadow of a question that has never once produced a satisfying answer. And the footage, grainy, time-stamped, final, remains the last known image of a 27-year-old man who, by every measure, had everything ahead of him. This is not a story about a monster. It is not a story about a conspiracy. It is a story about a Friday night in Columbus, Ohio, and a door that a young man walked through and never came out of on the other side. Brian Randall Shaffer was born on February 11, 1979, and grew up in Pickerington, Ohio, a quiet suburb on the eastern edge of Columbus. He was the elder of two brothers raised by Randy and Renee Shaffer, a family described by those who knew them as close and grounded. Brian graduated from Pickerington High School in 1997 and enrolled at Ohio State University, where he spent 6 years completing an undergraduate degree in microbiology. In 2004, he was accepted into the Ohio State University College of Medicine. By the spring of 2006, Brian Shaffer was 27 years old and deep into his second year of medical school. He was tall, 6'2", with brown hair and hazel eyes, and a small distinctive on his left iris. On his upper right arm, he wore a tattoo, a stick figure logo from the cover artwork of the Pearl Jam single, Alive. Friends described him as easygoing, funny, someone who genuinely liked people. He was passionate about music. He told people that despite the path he had chosen, medicine, a profession of commitment and discipline, what he really wanted was to start a band. He loved Jimmy Buffett. He dreamed about the tropics, about a life less complicated than the one he was building. He was also, by early 2006, in the middle of grief. His mother, Renee, had been diagnosed with myelodysplasia, a rare and serious blood disorder. In March of 2006, 3 weeks before Brian disappeared, she died. Those who knew him said he was handling it, in the way that people his age often handle impossible things, by continuing to move, to study, to show up. But the weight was there. His father, Randy, could see it. His friends could see it. He had drawn closer to his family in the weeks after his mother's death, leaning on his father and his younger brother Derek. There was also someone new in his life. Alexis Wagoner was another second-year medical student at Ohio State. The two had become romantically involved in 2006, and by the spring, those around them believed that Brian was planning to propose. Not yet, but soon. The two had booked a trip to Miami for the spring break that began at the end of March. People who knew Brian said Miami was exactly the kind of place that appealed to him. Warm, easy, far from the pressure of a medical school curriculum. He and Alexis also had tickets to see Pearl Jam perform. They had things to look forward to. On the evening of March 31st, 2006, the last day of classes before spring break, Brian had dinner with his father at a steakhouse. Randy noticed that his son looked exhausted, the kind of tired that builds up over weeks of studying and grief, and the constant forward motion that medical school demands. He did not think Brian should go out that night. He kept that thought to himself. After dinner, Brian went to meet his friend William, Clint, Florence. The two men had known each other well. Florence would later be identified in police accounts and media coverage as Shaffer's roommate or close friend, the kind of person you call when you want company on a Friday night. They started their evening at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was a bar on the second floor of the South Campus Gateway complex, a commercial development on High Street near the Ohio State campus. The area had a relatively high crime rate at the time, and the Gateway complex had responded by installing security cameras throughout the building. This fact, the presence of those cameras, would later become central to one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Brian and Clint arrived at the Ugly Tuna around 9 p.m. Around 10 p.m., Brian stepped away and called Alexis, who had returned to her family's home in Toledo for the beginning of break. He confirmed their plans. He told her he was out with friends. The call was ordinary. What followed was an ordinary Friday night for two graduate students celebrating the end of a semester. Shaffer and Florence left the Ugly Tuna and bar hopped south along Columbus's nightlife corridor, working their way through the Arena district. At each stop, according to Florence's later account to police, the two had one shot of hard liquor. They were drinking, but moving. After midnight, still out, they ran into a woman named Meredith Reed, a friend of Florence's, in the Short North neighborhood. Reed drove them back north to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, where they rejoined the crowd for a final round. This is confirmed on the surveillance footage. At 1:15 a.m. on April 1, 2006, cameras recorded Brian Shaffer, Clint Florence, and Meredith Reed ascending the escalator to the bar's second-floor entrance. What happened inside the bar over the next 40 minutes is not fully captured on film. The bar was crowded, a Friday night at the end of a semester, spring break beginning in the morning. Somewhere in that crowd, Brian Shaffer became separated from his companions. At 1:55 a.m., a camera mounted outside the bar's entrance recorded Brian Shaffer standing near the escalators. He was speaking with two young women. The exchange was brief and appeared casual. He seemed to be saying goodbye. Then he turned and walked back inside the bar. That is the last known image of Brian Shaffer. At 2 a.m., the Ugly Tuna Saloona closed. Patrons filed out. Florence and Reed, unable to find Brian, called his phone repeatedly. No answer. They waited outside. He did not emerge with the departing crowd. After some time, they concluded he must have already left on his own, perhaps slipping out before them and heading back to his apartment. They went home. He never arrived at his apartment. His car was there, parked outside on King Avenue, 6 blocks from the bar. But Brian was not. Alexis Waggoner waited. She was at Brian's apartment that weekend, expecting him to return. She called his phone and it went straight to voicemail, again and again. She told herself there was an explanation. On Monday morning, April 3, 2006, Brian Shaffer did not show up for the flight to Miami he had booked with her long before. He was reported missing to Columbus police that day. The investigation began at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Detectives went immediately to the surveillance footage, and what they found created the first and most lasting mystery of the case. The cameras showed Brian entering the bar at 1:15 a.m. They showed him at the entrance at 1:55 a.m. They did not show him leaving. This was not a gap in coverage. Cameras recorded the crowd exiting when the bar closed at 2 a.m. Brian Shaffer was not visible among them. Investigators considered the possibility that he had changed his clothes inside the bar, obscuring his appearance from the cameras. They considered that he had kept his head down or worn a hat. They looked at the building's layout for alternative exits. There was one, a service door, not generally available to patrons, located a short distance from where Brian was last seen. That door led to a first-floor hallway, which at the time connected to an active construction area with its own exterior exit. Some officers noted that navigating that route while intoxicated would have been difficult. They also acknowledged that the cameras covering that area were imperfect. One panned continuously across the space, and another was operated manually, meaning coverage was not complete. Police reviewed footage from 3 other bars in the immediate vicinity. Brian Shaffer did not appear on any of them. They searched the surrounding streets. Officers with police dogs combed the area, examined dumpsters and waste containers, and canvassed local residents. They searched the Columbus sewer system after obtaining city permission to do so. They went to Brian's apartment. His car was there. Nothing inside appeared disturbed. No signs of struggle. No indication that anything unusual had happened before the night of March 31st. Flyers bearing Brian's photograph went up across Columbus. His description was distributed: 6'2", brown hair, hazel eyes, a pearl jam tattoo on his upper right arm. Investigators noted the distinctive dot on his left iris, a feature that might be remembered by someone who had looked him in the face. Nothing came back. Those who had been with Brian that night were asked to cooperate with investigators. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, submitted to a polygraph test and passed. Meredith Reed, the woman who had driven them back to the Ugly Tuna, also took and passed a polygraph test. The 2 women Brian had been speaking to on the surveillance camera near the escalators, his last known human contact, were later identified. In 2009, they told reporters that police had never asked them to take a polygraph at all. Clint Florence refused. Florence hired an attorney. His lawyer, Neil Rosenberg, later stated that the decision to decline the polygraph had been made at his recommendation, standard legal counsel in any situation involving a criminal investigation, and that Florence had cooperated with police from the beginning, providing everything he knew about the events of that night. Florence was not charged with any crime. He has not been publicly identified as a suspect by law enforcement. But the refusal did not go unnoticed by the people who loved Brian. Derek Shaffer, Brian's younger brother, said publicly that he found Clint's behavior strange. "I've always thought he definitely knows something, just won't come forward with it," Derek said in a 2009 interview. Alexis Wagoner, Brian's girlfriend, said she believed Florence knew more than he had disclosed. Private investigator Don Corbett, who worked the case for the Shaffer family without charge for years, said Florence had refused his requests to take a polygraph as recently as September 2009. A former Columbus detective named John Fulton, who had reviewed the case, noted that investigators found certain dynamics within Shaffer's inner circle a little odd. Fulton, while acknowledging the strangeness, also publicly stated his belief that Brian had most likely walked away voluntarily. "Unless you're tied up with organized crime, bodies don't disappear," Fulton said. "Extensive searches and nothing's been found, nothing that would indicate violence." Florence has never spoken about the case publicly, beyond what his attorney communicated on his behalf. There is no confirmed evidence linking Clint Florence to any harm that may or may not have come to Brian Shaffer. What remains is an unanswered question and a decision that his closest companions and investigators have never fully been able to explain. In the months that followed, tips came in from across the country and eventually the world. Police and the Shaffer family received reported sightings of Brian from Michigan, Texas, and Sweden. None led anywhere. A tip would arrive, investigators would follow it, and it would dissolve into nothing. A misidentification, a resemblance, a wish. Alexis Wagoner called Brian's cell phone every night before she went to sleep. It went directly to voicemail, each time. Then one night in September 2006, 5 months after he disappeared, it rang. 3 full rings. She called it again and again. "I kept calling it to hear it purely because it was one of the best sounds I have ever heard," she later wrote, "even if no one picked up. Singular, Brian's wireless provider, cautioned that what Wagoner experienced may have been a computer glitch. But investigators also confirmed that a signal ping had been detected from Brian's phone at a cell tower in Hilliard, Ohio, a town roughly 14 miles northwest of Columbus. Whether that ping was genuine or a technical artifact was never definitively established. The phone has not been active since. Later in 2006, at a Pearl Jam concert in Cincinnati, lead singer Eddie Vedder paused between songs. He asked the audience, thousands of people, if anyone had any information about a young man named Brian Shaffer, a medical student from Columbus, 27 years old, had a Pearl Jam tattoo on his arm. Vedder asked people to come forward if they knew anything. No useful information resulted. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, threw himself into the search. He had just lost his wife. Now he was losing months and then years to a question no one could answer. A psychic he consulted told him that Brian's body was in the water, near a bridge pier. Randy and Derek bought waders and spent their free time walking the banks of the Olentangy River, which flows through Columbus adjacent to the Ohio State campus, searching near bridges. They found nothing. In September 2008, Randy Shaffer was clearing debris outside his home in Baltimore, Ohio, after a heavy windstorm. A branch from a tree fell and struck him. His neighbors found his body the following day. He died without knowing what had happened to his son. 3 theories have been seriously considered by investigators, journalists, and the family over the years. None has been confirmed. None has been fully eliminated. The first is voluntary disappearance. This theory holds that Brian Shaffer chose to leave, walked out of the Ugly Tuna by some route not captured on the surveillance cameras, made his way out of Columbus, and started over somewhere else under a different name. Those who support this theory point to the circumstances surrounding him in early 2006. The death of his mother, the pressure of medical school, a life that by most accounts he sometimes felt ambivalent about. He had told friends that his real dream was music, not medicine. He had spoken openly about wanting a simpler life. A former investigator who reviewed the case noted that there was nothing that would indicate violence, and nothing to rule out a deliberate exit. The Ohio Attorney General's office later released an age progression photograph showing what Brian Shaffer might look like today, which would be used in any future sighting, a tacit acknowledgement that he could still be alive. The weakness of this theory is the absence of any trail. No bank withdrawals, no credit card activity, no new identity surfaced, no contact with anyone he had ever known. The people closest to Brian, his girlfriend, his father, his brother, found it difficult to reconcile the man they knew with a person capable of staging a complete and permanent disappearance, particularly given that he was, by all accounts, planning to propose to Alexis. The second theory is accidental death. The construction area near the service door created potential hazards. The surrounding neighborhood had dark corridors, and the Olentangy River was not far. A young man who had been drinking, possibly alone and disoriented, might have had an accident, fallen, drowned, become trapped, in a location that was later sealed off or otherwise rendered unsearchable. Some who followed the case pointed to the construction zone specifically, suggesting that Brian may have exited through the service door, become disoriented, and suffered a fall that left no public trace. Police searched the area thoroughly at the time. Nothing was found. The Olentangy River was also searched, without result. The third theory is foul play. This is perhaps the least developed of the 3, precisely because evidence for it is so sparse. There is no physical evidence of violence. No blood, no signs of struggle, no witnesses who reported anything alarming. The smiley face murder theory, a hypothesis promoted by 2 retired detectives linking the deaths of young men across multiple states, was briefly considered but was ultimately rejected by Columbus police. consistent with the assessment of the FBI and other agencies that examined it. Whether Brian encountered someone dangerous in or near the Ugly Tuna Saloona, someone whose identity has never come forward, remains unknown and unverifiable. Each theory has a version of the same problem. It requires Brian Shaffer to have left the building without being captured on any camera, and investigators have never been able to fully explain how he did that. Brian's brother Derek has continued to speak publicly about the case in the years since. He has asked Clint Florence on multiple occasions to provide any additional information he may have, however small, however seemingly insignificant. Derek has expressed that even the most minor detail could matter. Florence has not responded publicly. In more recent years, a private investigator working with the Shaffer family disclosed that new tips had emerged regarding another individual who may have encountered Brian on the night he disappeared. Columbus police, when informed, told the investigator they were already aware of this person, that a tip about the same individual had come in back in 2006, and that the person had been the subject of a prior investigation. What came of that investigation has not been made public. In 2020, a photograph circulated online showing a man in Mexico who some believed resembled Brian Shaffer. The FBI examined the photograph and determined that the man was not Shaffer. The case officially remains open. Columbus police have said they continue to pursue leads. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Adults lists Brian Shaffer in their database. The FBI's VICAP system carries his file. The Ohio Attorney General's office has released updated materials in the hopes of generating new information. 20 years have passed. There are facts in this case that are beyond dispute. Brian Shaffer was a real person who had dinner with his father on the evening of March 31st, 2006. He went out with his closest friend. He called his girlfriend. He drank with the Friday night crowd in a campus bar. He was captured on a security camera at 1:55 in the morning, and he turned and walked back through a door. And then nothing. No confirmed exit. No confirmed route. No body, no contact. No trace sufficient to close the question. His car sat on King Avenue. His apartment was undisturbed. His girlfriend waited for him in a Miami hotel room that he never booked. His father spent 2 years searching before a falling branch ended his own life. His brother still carries the weight of an answer he has never received. What is most disturbing about the disappearance of Brian Shaffer is not the theories. It is not the surveillance footage, though that footage is haunting. It is not even the question of where he went, though that question is unanswerable. What is most disturbing is the quietness of it. A Friday night. A crowded bar. A young man saying goodbye to 2 women he barely knew. A turn back through a door. And then, for 20 years, silence. No camera sees what happens next. No witness steps forward with a moment that changes everything. No piece of evidence falls out of the years and lands in a place where someone can finally understand it. Brian Shaffer walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona at 1:55 in the morning on April 1st, 2006, and the world simply lost him. The building that held him is gone now. The bar closed years ago. The walls that might have held some answer have been gutted and rebuilt and repurposed. Whatever happened in the minutes after that camera last blinked and recorded his face, whatever it was that removed a 27-year-old man from the surface of the world without leaving behind a single reliable trace, it happened in a space that no camera reached, and it has never been explained.